Okay, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what I call the new art and science of marketing. And I'm going to start with this, which is, you know, I grew up on this stuff. I've been in marketing for 20, big number, higher than 25 years. AIDA, you know, we all grew up on this, didn't we? Awareness, interest, desire, action. And the funnel. Now, last year, IBM celebrated its 100th birthday, and in the marketing function, our boss asked the question, who's our CMO, global CMO, how long has this funnel thing been around? So we did a bit of digging, and the earliest time we could find any reference to it was 1898. Okay, 1898. A marvelous man called E. St. Elmo Lewis, who was the founder of the Association of National Advertising, and he came up with the funnel, or he published it first. 1898. And that's probably in the Encyclopedia Britannica, soon to only be online. Now, what's interesting about this is that's an awful long time ago. Now, if you move forward to 1961, two academics, Lavage and Steiner, wrote a paper which brought this a little bit more into the 20th century, but nevertheless, it was still a funnel, and it was still AIDA. And of course, this model gave us the lovely concept of above the line and below the line. More recently morphed into through the line. Well, I have news for you. There is no line. You know, there is no line. What are we all thinking about? It's extraordinary. It's an 1898 concept. There are very few 1898 concepts which really apply to our current world. You know, and that one certainly doesn't. So I think we all need to move rapidly on. Now, why do we need to move rapidly on? Well, you know, the world has changed. It has changed. The digital revolution, the arrival of the internet, thank you, Mr. Berners-Lee, has brought us into this. So you probably know a lot of this stuff. You probably know this better than I do. But Facebook, if Facebook was a country, it would be the third largest country on the planet. Since 2001, we, the population of this planet, have spent 5.93 million, so 5,930,000 years of time, cumulatively, playing World of Warcraft. There's a scary thought. Imagine if those people had spent that time doing something that was actually useful. Wired magazine announced that the web is dead. They don't mean, excuse me, they don't mean that the internet is dead. They mean that the concept of that rather static web that we all got rather excited about some years ago. Do you remember that time when the web arrived and we started doing online advertising instead of just print advertising? What do we do? Oh yeah, I know. We put ads on pages. And the only thing that was cool and funky about it was, well, you could make them animated because it was electronic, but we didn't really do anything much clever at that for quite a while. 1 in 5, nearly 1 in 5 of the global workforce now lives in India. Are they all moved there? That's where they are. There is a piece of analysis that says by 2020, there will be 26 smart devices for every human being on the planet. Now, you think about the smart devices, the iPhone, of course, that we're all going to be having very soon. I'm a BlackBerry user, I'm afraid, so I can't do the Bizabo thing. But you think about we all have one or two. I mean, lots of people have two. You know, their company provides them with one, and then they have a personal preference for another. I just got back from a trip to the States. In my briefcase, I had my BlackBerry, my iPod Touch, because I'm still wedded to it, and it has lots of great music on it, my iPad, and my laptop. You know, 4 devices. You know, it's getting rapidly out of control, isn't it? And that's just me. But 26 per human being. This is a great one, talking about disintermediation, which I will continually refer back to. When the whole BP Gulf thing happened, the BP Twitter account, the corporate Twitter account, had 29,000 followers. The fake BP Twitter account that was set up to basically give them a hard time managed to accrue 170,000 followers. So we don't own our brands anymore, not in any real or significant way. And then just this point over here. In 1980, there were 1.7 billion people on the planet living in cities or urban areas. By 2050, it's predicted to be 6.4 million. That will be 70% of the population of the planet will live in cities or urban areas. And for those of you who've enjoyed the trip into central London today, even if you just had a pop across the river or whatever it was, you can just think how scary a thought that is. And I personally am not much looking forward to trying to work in London during the Olympics with an extra estimated 200,000 people a day coming through Waterloo Station, which is my station. Okay, so what does this mean for us in this room? So me, I'm an advertiser. I mean, you know, I work for IBM, but at the end of the day, you know, my relationship with most of you is that of an advertiser. Down here, them, my customers, your audience, and you in the middle, as the media, the mediator between me selling, them buying, you mediating in the middle. And that's been a very straightforward relationship until the advent of the internet, really. And I would say it's been disintermediated. And absolutely, you have a fantastic role to play, but it is no longer that simple and direct role that we all enjoyed because it was simple and direct and easy. So I think, we're in a place where, we are moving, rapidly forwards from there. As I said before, I think we were very slow to respond to the rise of the web, there's so much opportunity for us to do it differently today. There's so much need for us to do it differently today. Now, in IBM, we don't do the funnel thing anymore. So this is why there is no line, at least if you're talking to IBM, because it's a circle, and it's a virtuous circle, and it goes round and round and round. But this is basically the model that we have now started using working with our teams. And by the way, we didn't have a bunch of really super smart people dreaming this up in a darkened room somewhere. This actually was built on the back of, when we're really successful, what is it that we do? And what is it that we're not doing when we're not so successful? And we've tried to distill it out of that. So basically, you start in the top right, and it starts with belief. And the important thing about belief is it needs to be a shared belief. So it's not about me ranting at somebody and trying to, doing my evangelical bit, but it's actually about collaborating, co-creating to develop a shared belief. It's about then spurring decision makers to take action on that belief. It's about increasing their confidence that that action actually matters and therefore they will do it. And lastly, it's about advocacy. So it's about building constituency, and it's about working through networks of advocates. And if you think about the role you have played working with people like me over the years, I think you'll see that there is a huge opportunity for us to work together in every one of these. Now, in some of the things that we do in IBM, some of our marketing activities, we touch on different elements of this. There will be other activities which are very specifically targeted at one piece. So part of this piece down here, the spurring the decision maker to act on their belief and to increase their confidence that their action matters. So a lot of the stuff we might do around that would be around case study work, the sort of show not to tell idea. Up at the top right-hand side there, when we do events, we're more typically going to do events that are discussion and dialogue and debate oriented, rather than a full program of people being talked at. And again, very similar to, I think, the way that this has been put together. It's about workshops. You have to listen to me, but then you get to go to workshops and actually really engage. So this is basically how we're operating now. If your organisations want to work with organisations like mine, then you need to be able to help me to achieve these things, to work in this way. Now, that's a very quick trot through the world of Caroline Taylor, the views of Caroline Taylor. But I do actually have some data to share with you, some other perspectives, which fortunately are absolutely in sync with my own opinions. Isn't that handy? So last year, we ran our very first CMO study. IBM has, for about the last 10 years now, we created something called the Institute of Business Value. It's our research arm in terms of thought leadership research within IBM, and we run studies around the C-suite. So for 10 years now, we've been doing a Chief Executive Officer study. We've done CFO studies, procurement, blah, blah, blah. Last year, we did our first CMO study. So we face-to-face interviewed around the world, 1,734 CMOs. Now, I should just point out as well that one of the things that I was talking to the AOP team about earlier this year was whether there was a B2B versus a B2C cut of this data that would be interesting, given that your focus is B2B. And we took a look at it, and I'll share a little bit of the data with you in a moment, but honestly, there's very little difference. Funny old world. Marketing leaders, CMOs who work in the B2B environment, as I do. I mean, IBM does not, just to be really clear, in case any of you think we still sell laptops, IBM does not play in the consumer space at all, not even a tiny bit. The only people we sell to are businesses, organizations, governments, etc. Very little difference, very, very similar challenges. I think for those of us, and I know Joel Harrison's here from B2B marketing, You know, those of us who've been talking about this a lot in recent years about what is the difference between marketing to consumers versus to business, have been seeing those barriers break down and the differences diminish rapidly. My personal view is it's all those nice B2C consumer marketers catching up with those of us in the B2B space, finally. But maybe I'm slightly biased. Okay, so what's the key takeaway? The number one key takeaway from the CMO study is simply this, that 79% of the 1,734 marketers who were interviewed expect high complexity to impact them, their organisation, their marketing organisation and their business in the next 3 to 5 years. But only 48% of them feel prepared to deal with that complexity. And I think the reason why this is very interesting for the topic here today, which is around online publishing in the B2B space, that unpreparedness is something that really, really can be addressed. This is something that you, can help them with. Many of the things that they need to be doing that they're not doing right now are eminently fixable. Now, the thing that's kind of interesting about this is also that when we did our last CEO study in 2010, we asked a very similar question around expectation of complexity and how prepared CEOs are. And we got a very similar data point came out of that. So the good news is that CMOs are in sync with their bosses. That's good. Scary thing is that our economy here in the UK, in Europe, around the world, depends on business to return to growth and success. And we have this gap in ability to deal with the complexity that is our world. And so that's maybe slightly worrying. So I did want to just, I've got myself little notes and I'm not even looking at them. I did want to say to you that we've got a few cuts of the B2B versus B2C data. Of those 1,734, 426 of them declared themselves as B2B focused. 422 declared them as B2C focused. The other 886 said they were both, which I'm finding slightly bizarre, but anyway. Okay, so we looked at, we asked the question, what are the factors that have the most impact on the success of your marketing organisation, and how prepared do you feel to deal with that? And we mapped these. So the top 4 that came out, so these are high impact, therefore very important, but substantially unprepared to cope with it. And they were the data explosion, social media, the growth of channel and device choices, so think apps and smartphones and all that, iPads, tablets, etc. And lastly, shifting consumer demographics. So those were the top 4 things that they're struggling with. I think this is useful and interesting information for people in your organisations who are trying to sell to people like me. Because again, I mean, I think back to Michael's point, in the B2B media world, we actually know about data, we know about segmentation, we know about targeting, we know about measurement and tracking. And so I think there's a lot that can be done to help people. There is a huge amount of data out there. There absolutely is an explosion of data. Of course there is. Every time one of us tweets, it's another 140 characters out there in the ether. But the thing is, it can be a challenge, but it's actually much, much more of an opportunity. When you see the examples of organisations who make good use of the data to further their business rather than just sit and look at it and feel terrified. Social media has been a massive disintermediator for all of us, but again, it's embrace it. Don't just look at it as one more channel. Don't look at it as a sort of a weird alternative website that you pump messages out through. And of course you can use it like that, of course. But really use it in the way that the users are using it. Get in the middle of it, engage, use it to drive relationship and engagement. The growth of channel and device choices, I mean, yes, absolutely. And when Wired declared that the web is dead, they're just really referring to the fact that, for many organisations, they are already moving away from a big focus on their web presence and moving to, great apps on the App Store, great device support for tablets, for smartphones, etc., etc. And yes, again, that once again represents a huge challenge, but it's rather interesting, and especially from a publisher perspective, I would have thought, particularly for all of you, it's very exciting because, we've gone through the sort of, once upon a time we read magazines and newspapers, and that was kind of in the kind of lean back, slightly passive mode. The web meant it was very interactive. We got right in there, up to our elbows in all the information, and we interacted with it. the arrival of things like publications on your tablet, on your iPad or whatever, we're kind of back into lean back mode. That gives you a bit more control where it had been sort of slightly taken away for a while. So I think that's it's another interesting one. But anyway, so these are the 4. You can see here there are a whole ton of others. You know, financial constraints, that won't surprise you. You know, the issues around decreasing brand loyalty, ROI and accountability. You know, that's my #1 challenge. You know, last night, what am I doing at 11 o'clock? I'm writing to my CFO to explain to him why he needs to unblock the $1.2 million of POs he's sitting on. You know, that's it's just life, isn't it? So we kind of need to work through some of these things. But anyway, so let's drive this forward a little bit. Let's just have a little look. So I'm just going to compare and contrast here the answers we got. So this was the how prepared are you to manage the impact of the top 5 market factors that will have the most impact on your marketing organisation in the next 3 to 5 years. And so this is the B2B data. And then this is the B2C data. And if this works, I can flip back and forth so that I can just highlight a couple. So you can see there's not a huge amount of difference. So the data explosion, you know, 76% of B2C CMOs unprepared, 69% of B2B CMOs. So it's not really statistically relevant that there are these substantial differences. You know, similarly, the social media, B2B, 73% unprepared. Our B2C colleagues a little better at 66%. So they're worse at the data explosion, but better at the social media thing. So just to really say, yes, there is a cut of the data, and no, there isn't much difference, I guess is the point of that. Okay, so what came out of this? From the CMO studies, 3 basic takeaways. That we need to deliver value to empower customers. The digital revolution changed the balance of power, and we need to know and understand individuals, not just organisations or markets. That we need to foster lasting connections, and this is really about cultivating meaningful relationships with relevance, value, for the whole life cycle and around communities of interest. And then the third one here, to capture value and measure results. It's about, you know, quantifying, analysing. It's also looking for new skills in the teams in marketing organisations, and very importantly, new skills for the CMOs, for the marketing leaders themselves. That old adage, if you can't teach an old dog new tricks, well, it turns out that we marketing leaders are not old dogs, because we do learn new tricks. This is the other really interesting one, and it comes back off off that previous point about, you know, delivering value to empowered customers. So the digital grapevine, if I can put it like that, is a fantastic thing for marketers, but far too many are nervous of it or don't really know how to get value from it. So here we've got this thing where we're all recognising the power of the individual, the importance of the individual, the value of engaging with an individual, both in terms of relationship and engagement, but also understanding to be able to target very specifically. And yet, the most commonly relied on sources of insight to drive both strategy and plan within a marketing department are still these, you know, very large-scale macro views. So, you know, market research, competitive benchmarking, et cetera, et cetera. So the ones that are highlighted in yellows are really the sources that we would say are the ones where you'll get the most individual insight, versus the ones in purple are more the sort of macro. Just to take a look at this one and do the compare and contrast. This is the only area that I found in the study where I really believe that you see a substantial difference between B2B and B2C. You know, so if you look at the yellow bars, so particularly let's look at the customer analytics here. So in the B2B world, 68%. In the B2C world, 72%. If you look at, if I just go back here again, if we look down here at online communications, which is only 32% used in the B2B space, but in the B2C space it's 47%. So these are slightly bigger. I suppose it's not surprising, really. In the B2C space, they have spent more time thinking about the individual consumer. I met a marvellous woman. She's the product brand manager at Unilever, excuse me, for links. Now, for those of you who don't know about links, it is a range of smelly items for smelly teenage boys to make them smell less awful, I think is the general idea. And they use a lot of, you would imagine, excuse me, they use a lot of Facebook activity for their marketing. And she rather charmingly described them as her boys, my boys. There's a genuine sense of interaction within an individual 14-year-old boy. And you know, it's sort of passionately held, and that's who they want to appeal to, that individual, you know. It's fascinating. So I'm not surprised. I mean, it's what we see in the B2C world. B2B has to catch up. We have to. It is all about people at the end of the day. So these three highlights and what are the things people need to do. So, I mean, I've just highlighted it, sort of 3 key points that I think are particularly relevant for us in B2B and things that we need to do differently. So one is this point on focusing on customers as individuals. The second one is revealing preference and trends hidden in the data. Kind of place that one too. And then the third one is this idea of stimulating customer relationships and other tangible incentives. All the other points on the chart are important, but I think those 3 are the ones that are particularly interesting for us here. So here is my great debate. So I've already slashed the idea of there being a line. I don't think B2B or B2C is relevant anymore. I truly don't. I think it's B2P. I think it's business to person. And I'm not suggesting there shouldn't be business publications. Let me just be really clear. That's not the point. But for me as a marketer, how do I reach the people I need to talk to? So I need to talk to CEOs and CMOs and CFOs. I need to talk to CIOs, of course. I need to reach banks and retailers and. So, of course, there's an absolute place for publications or organisations who represent them and reach out to them, and I will use those absolutely to leverage. But I think the idea that my marketing is necessarily different as a business-to-business approach from a business-to-consumer approach is somewhat flawed. And actually, at the end of the day, we really talk about difference in buying occasion and buying behaviour. And I was chatting with Michael and a couple of others the first thing this morning. And at the end of the day, the buying behaviour that we as individual citizens, consumers, whatever, exhibit when we're making a high-value purchase, maybe a fancy camera or a car, is really, really similar to the behaviour you see in executives in a company making a big buying decision for their company. And we've done a lot of work on this around the purchase of technology, you can imagine. And so I really do think we have to get away from this trying to differentiate between the consumer and the business person. At the end of the day, we're just people. And we reach these people by great segmentation, great targeting, good messaging, building relationships, building credibility, etc. The other thing, of course, is if we're talking about business to person, wouldn't it be lovely if it was just the idea of having the world's best Rolodex? Database marketing once upon a time was the be-all and end-all. My goodness, if you had a good database, you were there. The reality, again, is that me reaching directly out to an individual, even if I know who they are, I know their name, etc., that's probably not the point. I need to reach them through a credible someone else, a point of influence. This is why Twitter is so fascinating. The concept of the retweet is a fascinating concept. I don't know how many of you are familiar with clout and clout scoring, but clout scoring goes up the more you get retweeted, basically, because it's expanding your influence. Stephen Fry, I think, now has 3 million followers on Twitter. Lady Gaga, apparently 20 million. Actually, the lady who does my job, but for IBM China, on the Chinese version of Twitter, because of all the China issues, they don't have what we would recognise as Twitter, but they have their own microblogging site. She has 760,000 followers. So she's not a pop star, she's just a humble CMO. But, we have to leverage all of these different points, is the point I was trying to make here. And again, so we just have to think about how many of those do people like you own, influence, make available. And that's where the relationships get very interesting again. So in all of this, how do we actually respond to this? So this is basically the redefined mission of marketing and communications in the IBM company. So IBM, 101 years old, about 430,000 employees globally. $107 billion of revenue last year, share price $200-ish, all-time high. It kind of makes you think a bit when you hit 100, especially as a tech company that started out making bacon slices. And so we've redefined our mission, and we've defined it like this. It is about the intentional management of brand and culture, not just brand. We don't manage our brand in the way that you might think we do. Those of you who are aware, latest Interbrand rankings, IBM's second most valuable brand on the planet, only behind Coca-Cola, ahead of many other brands you might think of as being more valuable. And so we are very, very focused on this idea of managing our corporate culture, to the point that we don't have a function called internal communications in IBM. We have a function which we call workforce enablement. That might just sound like weasel words, but it's actually not. It is an intentional thought that says, as IBM, by the nature of our business, our brand is primarily experienced through our employees, through the IBMer. And if our brand is primarily experienced through the IBMer, we better make sure that all of those 430,000-ish people are very, very comfortable in their role in representing our brand, our values, and that whatever it is that they do it absolutely on brand. And that's not about brainwashing them. It's actually about enabling them to work out what it means for them within their personality, within their role, within the way that they engage. This idea of making markets, this is not a new idea. IBM's been on this for a long time. Our biggest problem was we weren't very good at linking the making markets with the capturing markets. So IBM essentially spawned the concept of e-business. It absolutely spawned the era of the PC, and yet ultimately was not the most successful company in harvesting value, profit, from either of those areas. But this idea of making markets, which is to create new market spaces. So, you know, as I'm sure you can imagine, we sit down with those lovely people from the likes of Gartner and IDC and try and work out how big the IT market is and how much of it we can get our hands on, like any good commercial organization. It's kind of missing the point. If all we're ever doing is trying to steal market share from our competitors, you know, that's a bit of a zero-sum game. Much more interesting to figure out, okay, so what else do corporations invest their money into to transform their businesses that we could engage with and therefore expand the market. And then, of course, this idea of capturing markets. But again, you know, not using the good old AIDA funnel, using that wheel that I showed you, and really working to build out long-term relationships. So, you know, yes, of course, it's always great when somebody buys something. Short-term sale is always pleasing. But you know, how much better to be building long-term relationships, long-term purchase cycles, helping organizations to transform what they do. And so I guess, you know, it makes me ask the question, you know, why am I telling you all of this? It's a great question. Why am I telling you all of this? Well, I'm telling you this because I actually think that there is a trend in some discussions at some conferences that would suggest that the world of publishing, the world of advertising has become less relevant to people like me. And we find lots of other ways to do what it is we need to do. And I would actually counter that. I would actually say that I think you have more to offer me than you ever have at any time in the past. Because of the very disintermediation that might suggest that you don't, curiously. Because actually, the influence, the potential that you have to interact with the people that I need to interact with and to help me interact with them is much greater than it was when, you know, 30 years ago, you would have published stuff on paper, you would have put out TV stuff, you would have put out radio stuff. You know, all of a sudden, you know, the web and the digital revolution is actually giving you access to worlds and stuff that you have perhaps never had before. And I want a piece of that action, quite simply. So I think we all have to work out together, both as, you know, heads of marketing in the organizations that you would like to sell to, and yourselves, and work out how that relationship goes forward. But it's different, and I think it's a really quite exciting time. Now, I did say that I would share a few examples of kind of what I mean by this. So these are a few examples from recent past. So the first one I want to share with you is some very cool stuff that we did with Wired magazine. So Wired magazine and TED, Technology, Entertainment, Design. Are you familiar with TED? Really, really interesting thing. At the heart of IBM's brand is the idea that we serve the forward thinkers of society. That's kind of really who we're trying to reach out to. They're the people who buy our stuff, okay? You don't find many more forward-thinking people than you find at a TED event, whether they're just the TED fellows or the TED participants or whatever. And so we built this fantastic partnership with Wired magazine and with TED over 2 years. And basically, I mean, you can see some of the stuff here. Web content, both on the Wired homepage, on the TED homepage, enabling us to talk about some of our forward-thinking ideas around the idea of the smarter city and what does that really mean. Getting our Smarter Planet as our core strategy for the last 3.5 years, getting our Smarter Planet strategy out there. TED published a 8-page supplement into the magazine that reported back on the TED Global Conference in July. So in association with IBM, enabling us to get our messages out there, absolutely integrated into everything they were doing. And then importantly, actually at the TED Global Conference itself, IBM as a in large letters sponsor, but also enabling us to actually demo a really cool piece of smart energy technology that we've been developing up in Denmark, and actually let people get very hands-on with the concepts of that, which basically talks about things like, if everybody had electric cars, all of a sudden you'd have in everybody's garage essentially a very good short-term storage device for electricity. And therefore you could actually leverage that to help you smooth out the peaks and troughs in electricity requirements in any given area. So this is a very interesting one, and I would say, so from my perspective, what was important about that? The association with Wired was important. We could have gone to TED. I'm sure we could have gone to TED and negotiated that we would be a sponsor. That's a fairly straightforward thing to do. But it was the linkage between Wired and TED and IBM that was particularly cool, because not only did Wired facilitate this partnership, but they significantly amplified the impact. So everything good that happened that was directly with the TED participants and directly with the TED fellows was amplified many, many, many times by all the engagement with Wired, whether that was online, in print magazine, or indeed at the event. It generated more than 8 million page views, more than 1,200 positive blog posts, and more than 800,000 video watches. Now, those might not be amazing numbers if I was sharing those at a big B2C conference, if you had some massive consumer brand engagement, I don't know, think Apple and an iPad launch, for example. But actually, in my world, that's phenomenal. 8 million page views, that's an extraordinary number. Now, this next example, again, very interesting. This is from last year. This is around cloud. Now, cloud computing is much talked about by pretty much anybody, with a heartbeat these days, it would seem. And the point of this was not to talk about the technology, because it's actually really not very interesting. Very useful, just not very interesting. What's interesting about cloud computing is what it enables you to do as a business, the value that will bring to you as a business. So both The Economist, who you would expect to be very interested in that aspect, but also interestingly the New Scientist magazine, who had done a lot of stuff around what is cloud and how does it work and why is it a good idea. And so we developed this joint campaign, and I think this one is particularly interesting. 2 publications, clearly not competing, non-competitive publications, but 2 publications but working together with some common content between them. And so again here you can see some of the examples. So we had sort of advertorial style spreads and sort of more mainstream advertising. We used Twitter. We had a lot of case study content onto websites. There was a New Scientist, Economist, and IBM landing page that we sent people to. There was a caption competition. So this was appearing both in print media for both titles as well as on the web. So some bizarre photographs and, send us your best idea. Here you have a good one. So we have this rather bizarre picture, and you probably can't see what it says at the bottom, but this was, I don't know, in October. This is somebody at 2348. So this is a person that maybe needs to get a bit more of a life than he currently has. But Mr. Powell, his suggestion for this was, I asked for a hiring aid. You obviously need this more than me. Very witty. But again, just an interesting collaboration, non-traditional advertising, leveraging social media, leveraging a fun idea, bringing people together into one place, sending them back out to New Scientist, out to the Economist sites, out to IBM. Very content-rich, very much leveraging the credibility of those two publications. A hot topic, a slightly different stance on the hot topic. And then this last one is from Management Today. So back in 2009, IBM accepted the opportunity to become the business-to-business partner on a sustainability initiative that the Prince of Wales was launching called START. It was a very consumer-focused campaign, citizen-focused campaign. They realised they needed a business-to-business element, and we got the opportunity to do this. Just interestingly, just FYI, my predecessor in the role I do today had this on his desk. I started my job in November of 2009. This opportunity was on his desk and therefore on my desk. His parting advice to me was, I wouldn't touch it with a barge pole if I were you. He said, it'll be a nightmare working with royalty. No, don't go there. Fortunately for me, I absolutely ignored him because it's probably one of the best things that we did in 2010, 2011 from a marketing perspective, because all of a sudden, here we were running a summit with over 1,000 business leaders around different aspects of sustainability, but again, not an environmental stance specifically, but sustainability from a triple bottom line perspective, i.e., you've got to be sustainable economically, societally, and environmentally if you are actually going to endure, which is the ultimate definition of the word sustainability. So we partnered with Management Today. We were running a 9-day summit in September of 2010. By the way, 9-day summits, you only ever have to do one in your whole career. So if you haven't done yours yet, it might be waiting in the wings, but I've done mine, so I'm now safe. What a crazy idea, but actually it worked incredibly well. 9 consecutive days, most people came to 1 or 2 days, different theme, different topic each day. So myself, my boss, were probably the only people who actually did all 9. Anyway, partnered with Management Today around this, and again, just did some good, rich media content based on this that they pulled together. So they came along, they wrote, they blogged, published about it, but they also did a series of video interviews with some of the key speakers. So Jonathan Porritt, bottom left, nearly got me fired. Thank you, Jonathan, for saying lots of mean things about how rubbish the business world is at actually addressing sustainability issues, and we should get off our arses and do something about it, which our head of corporate environmental affairs from New York was less than impressed with, that I'd actually brought somebody in to say that. Ian Cheshire at the top left, so the chief executive of Kingfisher Group, so B&Q amongst others. Again, very powerful spokesperson on the topic of sustainability. And my good self, who can regularly be found to be spouting off on the concept of enlightened self-interest. So again, just an interesting thing. So something that we were already doing and engaged with, but how do you amplify it? And how do you amplify it with credibility? And so what do? You partner with an organisation that already has some credibility, in this case Management Today, and have them help pump your messages out there. So, I think that, I think in sort of summing this up, this is how we operate. This isn't how everybody operates, but it's not a million miles away, I'm sure, from many, many of the organisations that you work with. This idea of engaging a decision maker by forging a shared belief, isn't that what we have been doing in many instances with many of you over a long time? About spurring the decision maker to act on that belief. Again, hasn't that been the role of the media for many, many, many years? I mean, even if you think about in the non-business space of newspapers deciding which political party to follow. Increasing the confidence in decision makers that their actions actually matter. You know, that's something that many of us glean from reading case study examples, opinion pieces, etc. in publications. And building constituency and this idea of networks of advocates. So I can try and do that directly myself, but for you to be able to do that with me, for me, alongside me, is a very interesting proposition. I think I'd like to close with just two thoughts, really. For me, for my fellow CMOs around the world, please keep reinventing what you do, and keep bringing us great ideas. There is nothing more attractive to a CMO than somebody who knocks on their door with a really great idea. Okay, because we really don't have anywhere near enough of our own. I think that this will actually help bring us together in compelling and relevant ways to the people, the customers that we want to engage with. So I think this is a golden age of opportunity, to use an appalling cliche, and that's delightful to have the opportunity to come and chat with you this morning. And thank you for listening.